Hey guys, tonight we're easing into the slow, sun-warmed roads of the ancient Mali Empire, where the dust rises gently beneath your sandals, and the steady rhythm of distant drums hums like the soft pulse of the earth itself. The air smells faintly of sweet wood smoke, old leather, and roasted peanuts, and you find yourself meandering along well-worn footpaths that crisscross the dusty plains. You probably wouldn't survive this. Not the walking, not the sun, and definitely not the local diet that consists mostly of porridge, dried fish, and whatever nuts you can carry for miles in a palm leaf pouch. There are no padded sandals here, just thin leather soles that might as well be invitation letters to blisters. There's no air conditioning, just the shade of acacia trees if you're lucky, and the breeze is more like a polite suggestion than actual relief. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your local time and where you're listening from down in the comments. Always love seeing where the sleepy postal crew is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk the trade roads of Mali, where the rhythm is always deliberate. Donkeys plod slowly with sacks of gold dust tied tightly to their sides, their hooves sending soft puffs of sand into the air. The merchants move at a pace that would make modern commuters weep. Here there's no hurry, no frantic schedules, no overnight shipping. The journey is the life. And whether you're a trader, a herder, or a griot, the storyteller who carries the weight of memory, you walk these roads with the same patient rhythm. The sun settles low over the horizon as you trail behind a small caravan, their songs rising lazily into the sky. You pass low-walled villages, where women pound millet in wooden mortars, the thump-thump echoing softly like the heartbeat of the place. Children play chase between sun-cracked huts, their laughter trailing off like falling leaves. But what really catches your attention are the griots, the ones who walk with gourds strapped to their sides and ancient songs stitched carefully into their memories. These are the living libraries, the keepers of kings and family trees, the ones who can recite generations with the smooth precision of someone counting beads. You follow one griot in particular, his voice low and steady as he hums to himself, rehearsing the order of names like a lullaby. He carries no scrolls, no leather-bound tomes, just a memory so vast you wonder if his brain has extra storage space tucked behind his ear. Historians still argue whether these griots memorized entire lineages exactly, or whether the stories quietly adapted over time, the details softening like worn cloth. As you walk alongside him, you notice his gourd, polished smooth and etched with patterns that catch the sunlight. It's not just for water, he tells you. It's his memory map, his gentle guide when the stories threaten to spill into tangled rivers. The griot taps his gourd softly, explaining how certain scratches, ridges, or knots on the surface remind him of particular kings, wars, or tricky cousin marriages that could derail an entire lineage if he forgot to mention them. You trail your fingers across the gourd's curves, feeling the warm, worn grooves that are less like writing and more like tactile signposts. The smell of roasting groundnuts drifts from a nearby market, and you follow the griot as he pauses to sip from a clay cup filled with sweetened hibiscus tea. He shares that the tea helps him focus, but whether it's the sugar or the ritual itself, no one really knows. Some say the griots used tiny, everyday habits, tea, particular walking routes, favorite songs, as anchors for their memory work. Others believe it was simply the product of years and years of repetition, the stories settling in like smooth river stones. You rest under a broad tree where the bark peels in lazy curls, the kind of shade that invites you to do absolutely nothing. The griot begins to hum again, his voice low and patient, naming kings you've never heard of, weaving the story like a soft cloth. The donkeys shift lazily nearby, their tails flicking away slow, persistent flies. You notice the rhythm in everything: the griot's hum, the sway of the gourds, the soft crunch of sand underfoot. It's a world that moves like honey, not because people can't go faster, but because they choose not to. There's a quiet wisdom in this, a deliberate pacing that leaves space for stories to unfurl without being rushed. Historians still debate whether the stories these griots carried were fixed in precise detail or if they evolved quietly with each telling, folding in new wisdom and slowly polishing the edges like well-thumbed prayer beads. Some scholars insist the griots served as strict oral archivists, preserving unbroken chains of memory. Others suspect that the griots knew when to massage a story, to nudge a lineage here, to soften a harsh ancestor there, especially when recounting tales to the family who hired them. You find yourself drifting as the griot's story continues, the cadence pulling you along like a soft river current. His words blur into the rustling of dry grass, the slow creak of leather harnesses, the faint clink of salt slabs tied to the donkey's sides. The sun melts lower, casting long, sleepy shadows, and you let yourself ease into the gentle, persistent hum of this place where stories aren't hurried, where memory is not something you chase, but something you walk alongside, as steady and familiar as the well-worn grooves on a storyteller's gourd. You walk beside the griot as the sun slides lower, painting the sky in soft honey and pale rose. His steps are unhurried, his pace measured by the swing of the gourd at his side. The story continues, not with kings or wars just yet, but with how the griot himself was trained to remember. It didn't begin with empires, he tells you. It began with vegetables. You tilt your head, curious, as he explains that young griots in training often start with the most boring, ordinary lists: types of gourds, local fish, which cousin married which cousin 3 villages over, the sort of information most people would forget faster than yesterday's lunch. But here those lists are everything. The griot taps his gourd lightly as if to say, memory begins small. You imagine a young apprentice, sitting cross-legged under a baobab tree, trying to remember which family traded salt, which traded fabric, and which had the unfortunate habit of raising goats that wandered into everyone else's grain baskets. Historians still argue whether these memory drills were formalized teaching or simply passed along within families like a quietly understood chore. Some believe griots belonged to tight-knit clans with structured training, their skills refined generation after generation. Others suggest it was a more fluid calling, picked up through years of listening, wandering, and simply refusing to forget. You trace your fingers along the rough edges of your own thoughts, wondering if you could remember the name of a king you never met, or a marriage that happened centuries before your sandals touched this road. The griot smiles knowingly, as if he's seen that question before. He tells you that memory here isn't just about words, it's about rhythm. You watch as he claps softly, a steady beat that seems to match the tempo of the journey. He hums along, the names folding into the rhythm, each syllable slipping into place like a carefully laid stone. Sometimes the story slows, lingering over a particularly tricky ancestor with 5 wives and a tangle of half-brothers who nearly tipped the kingdom into a cousin war. Other times, it quickens, names rolling by in soft, staccato bursts, like palm nuts clattering in a wooden bowl. You pass a quiet village where women sit weaving baskets, their fingers moving in patterns that seem almost too quick for the sleepy air. One of them nods toward the griot and asks if he's still carrying the story of Sundiata, the Lion King whose footsteps supposedly shaped the Mali Empire itself. The griot grins and taps his gourd again, his voice low and teasing as he admits that even he sometimes gets tangled in that one. There are so many versions, he says, each with its own twist, its own soft bragging rights for whoever tells it. Historians still debate whether the griots maintained a single, unbroken version of Sundiata's life, or whether each village added its own seasoning, its own small adjustments, until the story grew like a braided rope, sturdy but textured by 1,000 hands. You sip sweetened tea from a calabash bowl, the sticky taste clinging to your teeth as you listen to the griot rehearse the story of a trader whose caravan once vanished in the Sahara, only to reappear 3 years later with camels weighed down by gold, salt, and apparently one extremely confused goat. The griot chuckles softly, explaining that sometimes the stories bend toward what people need to hear: a caution, a celebration, a softening of grief. He tells you that some tales are stitched carefully into riddles or songs to make them easier to carry, to keep them from slipping away during the long, silent marches across the desert. You trail him through a narrow path lined with low acacia trees, their thorns catching the edge of your sleeve. He gestures toward the spiny branches and says some griots use the shapes of trees along their regular paths as memory cues. One tree marks a birth, another a war, a third a strange diplomatic meeting involving a leopard skin and a misunderstanding over peanut cake. Historians still puzzle over whether these environmental memory markers were intentional, carefully chosen by griots as waypoints, or whether the brain simply glues stories to whatever it regularly passes: trees, rocks, the quiet bend of a riverbank. As you walk, the griot tells you about the songs, the ones with intentionally awkward rhythms that force the singer to slow down, to chew each name, to keep from rushing the lineage. You hum along with him, stumbling over the cadence, your tongue tripping where his flows like warm honey. The songs aren't always beautiful, he admits. Sometimes they're sharp and repetitive, not meant for listening, but for remembering. You pause under a tall baobab, its wide trunk cool against your palm. The griot leans back, letting his gourd rest gently in the crook of his arm as he recalls the small details. How a king's youngest son once traded his silk robe for a handful of honey cakes, or how an entire family's standing in the village was built on a story about a particularly heroic chicken. Historians still argue whether these side stories, the funny, the soft, the not quite epic, were simply entertainment or whether they served as social glue, anchoring the big, sweeping histories to the everyday lives of the people who listened. You notice how the griot's memory weaves both the grand arcs and the small, sleepy details that somehow feel just as essential. He remembers which cousins married, but also which cousin always lost his sandals. As you stretch your legs, brushing soft dust from your knees, the griot's rhythm starts up again, his voice gentle but persistent, tapping out the next beat, the next name, the next bend in the long, winding story. You follow, your steps falling into the rhythm, your ears still lingering on the sharp clatter of palm nuts, the soft hum of names, and the memory of a story that somehow began with vegetables and has now stretched quietly into the bones of an empire. You walk steadily now, the path smoothing beneath your feet, as the griot's story unfurls like a long, carefully woven cloth. He tells you that the history of West Africa wasn't written in stone first. It was carried in breath, in voices, in the soft creak of memory passed from one pair of sandals to the next. And that's where the gourd comes in. You've seen it swinging at his side, its rounded belly smooth from years of handling, its surface lightly stained from tea, from time, from rain that dried too quickly. The griot lifts the gourd now, his hand cradling it as though it's more than just a container. And here's the quiet surprise: the gourd isn't always for water.
Sometimes it holds small tokens: cowrie shells, slivers of wood, scraps of cloth, little markers to jog the mind when the story grows long.
Historians still debate whether these gourds were widely used as mnemonic tools or whether they served more symbolic roles, passed between griots as family heirlooms or badges of memory. Some argue they were filled with memory aids, almost like portable libraries. Others suggest the gourd was mostly practical, a container for tea or oil that simply traveled alongside the story. You trail your fingers over the smooth curve of the gourd side as the griot gently shakes it. You hear the soft rattle, tokens inside, each one linked to a name, a place, a moment. He explains that these tiny objects become memory hooks: a cowrie shell for a queen's coronation, a bit of cloth for a long ago battle where the wind smelled like roasted millet. It's like the gourd carries a pocket-sized empire. You picture yourself fumbling to remember your own shopping list, while this man carries dynasties inside a hollowed out plant. It's humbling. The path narrows, the bushes pressing in a little closer, their soft leaves brushing against your arms as you walk. The griot taps the gourd again, the rhythm settling back into your bones as he tells you about the grand caravan routes, the long lines of camels stretching like beads across the Sahara, their humps gently swaying under the weight of salt, gold, and sometimes gossip. You step carefully over a low patch of scrub, imagining the caravans pacing steadily over the dunes, their drivers whispering stories to pass the heat-heavy afternoons. Stories of kings who could turn rivers into gold, of oases that vanished the moment you reached them, of cities shimmering with glass that the wind swallowed whole. Historians still argue whether the griots themselves traveled with the caravans regularly, or whether their stories simply rode along, traded like salt and cloth, picked up by one group and retold by another, slowly stretching their way across the continent. The griot chuckles softly, his voice catching on a memory of one caravan that supposedly transported a giraffe all the way to a distant king, only for the giraffe to nibble half the cargo along the way. Whether it happened exactly like that is uncertain, but it's the sort of story people remember precisely because of its quiet absurdity. You pause near a small well, its rope worn smooth, its clay edges cool beneath your fingers. The griot offers you water from his gourd, the taste faintly earthy, the memory of the tree it once hung from lingering on your tongue. As you sip, he explains that the gourd isn't the only memory tool. There are songs with syllables that stack like building blocks, dances where each footfall marks a king's reign, and woven patterns where the stripes and colors map entire genealogies. You picture yourself trying to remember your own family tree, struggling to get past 3 generations, while here a single cloth can unfold 500 years if you know how to read its stitches. Historians still debate whether these woven memory cloths were standardized across regions or if each family, each village, kept its own visual codes, private maps stitched into their garments that could only be fully read by those who belonged. The griot hums softly now, a tune that rides the breeze like a familiar scent. He tells you how certain rhythms belong to specific clans. The beat for a blacksmith's family is different from the beat for a fisherman's. You can hear it in the drum, he says. even before the name is spoken. You wonder what rhythm would belong to you. A steady shuffle, perhaps, with the occasional trip over a tree root. The griot smiles as if he's already guessed. You pass a woman carrying a basket of dried fish on her head, her steps balanced and unhurried. She nods toward the griot's gourd and asks if he's still carrying the story of the empire with the golden river. He nods, tapping the gourd's smooth surface, and you can almost feel the memory tucked inside, waiting for the right moment to unfold. The woman leaves a small dried fish near the path, a quiet token, perhaps a joke, perhaps a trade, or simply a small gift for a story well carried. Historians still puzzle over whether these spontaneous gifts along the road were considered payments, offerings, or simply acts of community, gentle acknowledgments that memory, like fish, is best when shared fresh. As you walk on, the griot tells you about the rhythm of forgetting. Some stories, he says, are left behind on purpose. Not everything is remembered forever. Some names drift away like smoke. Some mistakes dissolve like footprints in soft sand. The gourd rattles softly at his side, the tokens gently shifting, the weight of memory pressing comfortably against his hip. You follow him, your own steps easing into the steady pulse of the story, the road stretching ahead like a quiet promise. You walk beside the griot as the path curves gently toward the edge of a village, where the scent of roasting millet wafts lazily through the afternoon air. Children play near a small circle of baobab trees, their laughter bubbling up like soft percussion against the steady thump of a distant drum. The griot taps his gourd thoughtfully, the tokens inside clicking in a slow, familiar rhythm as he tells you about the masters of the drum, the ones who don't just play music, but who carve messages into beats. They are the drummers who speak. In this part of the world, you learn, not all drums are meant to summon dancers. Some are meant to carry words, to stretch sentences across the fields and forests, to ripple through the air like smoke signals you can hear. You pause near one of the baobabs, its smooth bark cool under your palm, as the griot explains how talking drums can mimic the rise and fall of local languages, tones bending, pulses stretching, to call out names, announce arrivals, or send warnings faster than any runner could. Historians still argue whether talking drums were a primary communication tool across entire empires, or whether they mostly served local villages, with long-distance messages often losing their meaning as they crossed dialect borders. Some believe the drum beats carried messages for miles. Others suggest the limits of tone and local phrasing kept most messages within a day's walk. The griot describes the way each village drummer could be recognized by their signature rhythm, like a voice print carved into the air. You imagine someone calling your name on the drum, the sound rising in soft ripples, the syllables stretching long and sleepy like the shadows of the baobab trees. But the drums weren't the only way news traveled. The griot tells you about the sand paths, those quiet, well-worn routes connecting villages where the footprints of traders, messengers, and traveling griots overlap like threads in a well-used basket. Some say the paths remember better than people do. You follow the griot as he veers toward one of these paths, its soft dust clinging to your sandals, the faint traces of earlier travelers still visible in the warm afternoon light. He tells you that on these roads, a griot might hear the same story 3 times in 3 villages, each version gently twisted like the fibers of a rope, pulling in different directions. You imagine trying to keep the thread straight in your own mind, to remember whose version promised a river of gold and whose version quietly warned that the river was mostly mud. Historians still debate whether the variations in oral histories were seen as mistakes, deliberate embellishments, or simply part of the story's natural life. Some scholars suggest griots prided themselves on precision, carefully anchoring key details. Others argue that gentle shifts, local color, and playful exaggeration were not only tolerated but expected. The griot's gourd rattles softly as he walks, and he taps it absently, the tokens inside clicking like patient raindrops. You pass a roadside stall where a woman sells bundles of cola nuts, their bitter scent sharp and familiar. She offers one to the griot, a quiet trade for a story later, perhaps when the stars have stretched across the sky and the fires burn low. The griot smiles and slips the cola nut into his pouch, another soft marker along the day's journey. He tells you that the griot's gift isn't just in remembering kings or tracing the tangled roots of family lines. It's also in knowing when to pause, when to linger, when to let silence wrap the story like soft cloth. You pause with him near a stone bench where two elders sit quietly, their sandals dusted from the road. They nod to the griot, and one of them softly asks if the story of the rainmaker is still in his gourd. The griot lifts the gourd gently, tipping it just enough for the faint rattle to answer. Yes, it's still there. And you wonder, how many stories can one gourd hold? The griot tells you about the rhythm of remembering, that a story isn't always stored in straight lines. Sometimes it folds, sometimes it circles back, brushing lightly against earlier moments like a friend gently reminding you where you left your sandals. You think of your own memory, the way you forget where you placed your keys, but can recall the exact taste of the bread from that one cafe years ago. Maybe memory isn't a straight road, it's a soft weave, a wandering path that loops when it needs to. Historians still discuss whether the griots memorized their stories in fixed order or whether their recall was more like a branching river, each detail offering a quiet tributary to follow, depending on the listener, the day, the pulse of the moment. You pass a slow-moving herd of goats now, their soft hooves kicking little clouds of dust. One goat lingers near you, eyeing the gourd with a mix of curiosity and casual hunger. You can't help but grin, imagining the goat's version of history, a timeline of the best roadside grass and the softest resting spots. The griot gestures for you to follow as the path rises gently toward a low ridge, where you can see the sweep of the land ahead, dotted with groves and small cooking fires, their smoke curling like sleepy dancers in the sky. He taps his gourd again, the rhythm soft and familiar, the pulse of stories folding around you like a well-worn blanket. And as you walk, the road unfurling steady beneath your feet, you begin to realize the gourd isn't just a container, it's a map, a pocket-sized rhythm of the world, curved and light, resting easily against the hip of the man who carries it. And you walk with him, your steps finding their place inside the story's gentle beat. You continue walking alongside the griot, the sandy path shifting softly beneath your sandals. The afternoon heat relaxes now, the sun sliding gently toward the edge of the sky, and the breeze carries with it the faint, sweet scent of drying millet and roasting yams. The griot's gourd taps steadily against his hip, each click of its tokens like footsteps echoing in his memory. As you stroll together, he begins to tell you about the secret codes hidden inside the stories, quiet signals that you might miss if you're not listening carefully. See, in the griot's world, stories are not just entertainment, they're practical. They pass along instructions, warnings, and even subtle political messages, all wrapped in the soft folds of a tale. You pass a woman weaving cloth beneath a low awning, her shuttle flicking back and forth with a steady rhythm that almost matches the tapping of the gourd. The griot pauses, watching her work, then murmurs about the importance of patterns, the way a certain twist of color can signal alliance, the way certain motifs whisper about lineage. It's all part of the code. He tells you about proverbs, those quiet packages of wisdom that griots sprinkle into their stories like soft, secret breadcrumbs. A saying about the patience of a river might mean more than it seems. It could hint at a local leader's stubbornness or warn of the slow approach of war. Historians still debate whether these proverbs were rigidly tied to specific historical events or whether griots used them more fluidly, adapting their meanings to suit the audience and the moment. Some scholars insist the proverbs carried locked-in significance. Others suggest their power lay precisely in their flexibility. You walk on, passing two boys arguing good-naturedly over who can balance a clay pot longer on their heads. Their laughter drifts behind you like little drum taps, fading as you and the griot move toward the heart of the village. There, a small group of elders gathers beneath a canopy of woven grass mats. They sit in slow, comfortable silence, their hands resting on walking sticks polished smooth from decades of use. The griot doesn't speak right away. He knows stories aren't dropped like stones. They're placed carefully, like seeds. You settle in beside him, the cool earth pressing gently against your legs as he begins to tell the story of the hunter who followed an antelope too far and found an empire instead. At first, you think it's just a wandering tale, chasing animals, crossing rivers, getting into trouble. But the griot's voice moves with a deliberate rhythm, layering details like careful stitches in a robe. You start to notice the signals tucked inside. The hunter's journey isn't just about courage, it's about migration, the quiet push of people toward greener lands. The antelope isn't just a prize, it's a symbol of guidance, of choosing paths carefully. The rivers crossed aren't just scenic, they mark territories, echo trade routes. The elders nod slowly, their gazes half-lidded, their breathing soft and steady. They know this story, but they listen anyway, not to be surprised, but to remember, to revisit, to reweave. You realize the griot is playing with the pace, lingering over some parts, slipping quickly past others. He's adjusting the story for this audience, here, now. Tomorrow, it might sound a little different. Historians still argue whether griots performed from strict memorized scripts or whether they improvise key elements in real time, bending the tale like soft metal to suit the mood, the politics, the village gossip. The griot's gourd rests against his knee now, its token still, as if the story itself is doing all the moving. You trace your fingers lightly across the fine grooves worn into the gourd's surface. They feel like soft echoes, like the quiet footprints of stories told 100 times. As the tale of the hunter winds toward its familiar end, a return, a village founded, a legacy woven, the griot leans back, his words slowing like the last few ripples of a pebble splash. One elder smiles faintly and murmurs, "But what happened to the antelope?" The griot simply taps the gourd once, the soft rattle its own quiet punchline. And everyone knows that part isn't the point. You think about how modern stories sometimes need neat bows, satisfying endings, clear morals. But the griot's tales are not made for that. They're made to fold into your life like a soft tune you hum without realizing, like the rhythm of your steps as you wander toward the next village. You follow the griot as he rises, brushing dust from his robes, his pace slow and steady. You pass a man repairing a fishing net, his fingers moving with quiet precision as he knots the fine threads back together. The griot gestures toward him and says that remembering a kingdom is like repairing a net. You don't tug too hard, or it all comes apart. You walk together toward a grove where the air smells faintly of crushed leaves and river silt. The griot taps the gourd again. the sound like a soft heartbeat in your ear. And as the light begins to soften, you start to feel the quiet weight of the stories settling on your shoulders. Not heavy, but present, like a well-worn cloak. You think about all the codes tucked inside them, the whispered warnings, the quiet agreements, the lessons disguised as jokes. You realize you've already started to remember pieces, a name here, a proverb there, the click of the tokens, the tilt of the gourd. You wonder if the story has already folded itself into you. You follow the griot's soft footsteps as he leads you along the edge of the grove, where the trees lean low and the breeze tugs gently at their branches. The scent of river water mingles with the soft must of old bark, and the tokens inside the gourd clink faintly as he walks. The griot gestures to a large baobab tree, its trunk wide and split with age, its limbs twisted like the arms of someone who spent centuries pointing in every direction. He taps his gourd softly against its bark and tells you this tree is older than the empires whose names he carries. You sit together beneath the shade, the ground warm, the air slow and thick with that late afternoon calm. The griot begins to explain the unspoken art of his role, the balance between truth and story. See, griots don't simply recite history like a stone tablet. They mold it like soft clay, shaping what is needed, what will be heard, what will carry forward. The line between fact and tale isn't a wall, it's a slow-moving river, and griots cross it constantly. He tells you that sometimes names are lengthened, events smoothed over, entire years skipped like flat stones over water, and sometimes the opposite. Tiny moments are stretched wide, embroidered with careful detail to give the story weight, shape, breath. Historians still argue whether griots were reliable record keepers or whether their performances prioritized entertainment and moral instruction over strict accuracy. Some scholars argue that the griots preserved the core of history faithfully. Others suggest that what mattered was not the letter of the past, but the feeling of it. You listen as the griot taps a steady rhythm on his gourd while he tells you about the histories hidden in praise names, those long, rolling titles that pile honor upon honor, stretching out like silk in the breeze. Each ruler, each warrior, each matriarch carries a string of these names, carefully chosen, delicately arranged. They're not just decorations, they are memory anchors. To forget one name is to unravel the story. You hear the griot chant a string of them now, softly, steadily, each name rolling into the next like beads on a thread. The elephant who shakes the forest, the one who never forgets, the sun-warmed sword, the weaver of rivers, the kindness with teeth. You can't help but smile at that last one. The griot glances at you, amused, and says that sometimes praise names sneak in a little humor, a little playful jab. A great leader might carry the name Thunder Voice, but everyone knows his singing was terrible. You wonder whether these playful names were open secrets or carefully tucked inside the performance. Historians still debate whether griots were free to gently mock their subjects within the layers of flattery, or whether the audience simply accepted the sly humor as part of the tradition. You watch a young boy nearby trying to carve his own little gourd. The surface still pale and smooth, the tokens inside clinking awkwardly. He glances over at the griot, hopeful, and the griot nods gently, as if to say, "Yes, this is how it begins." The griot tells you that memory isn't a straight line, it's a woven mat. The names, the stories, the proverbs, they braid together, looping and crossing over each other. And the griot walks those lines, careful not to step through the weave. You pass a group of women sorting baskets of kola nuts, their hands moving quickly, their conversation drifting easily from the price of cloth to the best time to plant groundnuts to who might win the next wrestling match. Their words are light, but the griot tells you they carry stories too. He explains that griots listen not just to elders, but to marketplaces, to river crossings, to casual laughter beneath shade trees. The story of a kingdom is sometimes folded into a joke about yams. Historians still argue whether griots carefully documented every piece of oral history they heard, or whether they selectively chose the versions that best served the moment. Some believe the griots curated their histories with a steady hand. Others suggest the stories flowed like a river, changing shape with each retelling, each village, each season. The griot's gourd swings softly at his side as he tells you about the empires that rose and fell beneath the touch of these stories. Mali, Songhai, Ghana. You picture maps now, those flat drawings that historians draw to box in kingdoms. But the griot draws his maps with words, with rhythms, with lines you walk, not lines you draw. You pass a smith hammering a piece of iron into a smooth curve, his strokes slow, deliberate, each ring of the metal carrying out into the village like a heartbeat. The griot pauses beside him, gently tapping the gourd in time with the hammering. He tells you that blacksmiths, like griots, carry sacred knowledge, both shape raw material into something that lasts. One works with fire, the other with words. You think about that as you walk on, the weight of a gourd, the weight of a story, the weight of a sword. The griot hums a low tune now, the kind that coils softly through your chest, its notes settling like warm stones. He tells you that sometimes the story is not spoken, it's sung. A lullaby can carry the shape of an empire. You remember the hunter and the antelope, the names that tumbled like river stones, the gentle clink of the gourd's tokens. And you realize the story has already begun to nest inside you. The sun tilts lower, the breeze growing softer, the air brushing against your skin like a worn cotton wrap. You keep walking with the griot, listening to the quiet hum of the village, the distant laughter, the soft, steady pulse of memory. And somewhere, the tokens click again, like the turning of a page you'll never quite finish. The path winds a little now, drawing you away from the thicker groves and toward the edge of a wide, lazy river. The air here smells cool and soft, tinged with the faint bite of damp clay and the sweetness of river reeds. The griot walks beside you, his gourd swinging gently, its tokens clinking like distant bells. He tells you that the river remembers too. You watch as small canoes drift along its surface, their paddlers moving in slow, steady rhythms, as if they have all the time in the world. The griot's voice softens as he explains that rivers like this carried not just trade, gold, cola nuts, salt, but stories. A merchant's tale of a distant king could ripple along the water, stop at every village, and arrive miles downstream wrapped in a dozen new layers. You pause near a fisherman repairing his net, his fingers deftly weaving the frayed cords. The griot crouches beside him, offering a quiet greeting. They speak of the water's movements, of how the fish have been shy lately, of how the river's moods shift with the season. The fisherman laughs and says the river spirits must be feeling lazy this month. The griot taps his gourd softly and tells you that in these lands, stories about rivers are often shaped by the belief that spirits dwell within them, sometimes helpful, sometimes mischievous, always watching. The river spirits might tangle a fisherman's net or guide a boat to safety or quietly snatch away a prized sandal without a trace. Historians still argue whether these stories were taken as serious religious practices or if they lived somewhere in that delicious middle space, part caution, part comfort, part playful shrug toward the unknown. Some scholars suggest the river spirits were actively honored with offerings and ceremonies. Others think they served more as friendly explanations for life's everyday hiccups. You step closer to the water, letting the cool splash brush against your sandals. The current tugs gently as if inviting you to drift a little. The griot tells you that songs travel best by boat. Traders would hum them across the rippling water. Griots would carry new melodies from village to village, and sometimes a fisherman's lullaby would find its way into the memory of an empire. You pause to imagine it. A song about drying fish becoming generations later a noble proverb. It's not so far-fetched. The griot explains that rivers weren't just highways for goods. They were memory streams, carrying names, weaving tales across miles of quiet water. And sometimes the river itself would change a story. Currents would misplace a detail, mishear a name, drift the truth gently downstream. Historians still debate whether the river's role in spreading oral history made the stories more consistent because of regular travel and repeated contact, or less reliable, as tales twisted and bent with every retelling. Some argue that major events stayed solid, like the bedrock beneath the water. Others believe the stories shifted like silt, always settling into new shapes. The griot begins to hum as you walk along the river's edge, his tune slow and rolling, like the river itself. He tells you this melody is a river song, part map, part prayer, part gossip, the kind of tune a paddler sings when he's not sure whether his next stop will be a village or a crocodile. You pass a cluster of children skipping stones across the surface, their laughter ringing out in the quiet air. The griot pauses to watch them, smiling, and tells you that skipping stones is a kind of storytelling, too. You send something across the surface, watching how far it goes, how many times it touches the water before it sinks. Maybe the river keeps those skips in its memory, too. You wander past bundles of reeds stacked for basket weaving, their green edges curling slightly in the sun. The griot shows you one of his tokens, a small carved figure, smooth from years of handling. He says this one is for the river. You notice that the tokens are not just objects. They are shortcuts to stories, each one holding the scent, the weight, the feel of a moment that could unfurl into an hour-long tale if you tapped it just right. You trail your hand along a hollowed-out canoe, its sides worn smooth from countless journeys. The griot tells you this boat once carried salt from the mines in the north, and that the man who carved it was known for paddling faster than the river spirits could chase. Of course, the griot winks. Some say he simply had very nervous goats on board. You find yourself walking through the river village now, where fish dry on wooden racks, their silver scales catching the late light like tiny mirrors. The breeze carries the sharp, salty scent, and the low hum of distant singing drifts over the water. The griot explains that river villages like this one knew more than people gave them credit for. They heard stories first, long before the news reached the grand palaces or the tall cities. A boatman's whisper could outrun a camel's step. Historians still argue whether the role of river villages in transmitting political news and royal decrees has been underappreciated in the written records, which often favor the grand courts and central markets. Some scholars think these quiet villages were essential hubs of memory. Others suggest their contributions drifted away like songs on the current. You sit by the riverbank now, the soft mud cool beneath you, the Gourds tokens clicking gently as the griot sets it beside him. The water laps at the reeds, slow and patient. The griot begins to recount the story of a ruler who sent a gourd filled with salt as a gift to a distant ally, a gesture so simple, so ordinary, yet remembered for centuries. It wasn't the salt that mattered. It was the gourd, the vessel that promised memory would travel safely. You look out over the wide, smooth river, its surface painted in shades of soft blue and gold, and you wonder how many stories have been carried across this water, how many names have skipped like stones, how many melodies have folded themselves into the gentle waves. You rest there, the hush of the river brushing over your shoulders like a cotton wrap, the tokens softly ticking in time with the lapping water. The river remembers. You follow the griot as he rises, brushing the soft river mud from his hands. His gourd swings at his side again, the quiet clink of its tokens a steady pulse now, almost like the river left its rhythm in your ears. The path curls inland once more, away from the smooth hum of the water, and you find yourself meandering through a patchwork of farmlands where the scent of sun-warmed grain clings to the air. The griot taps his gourd thoughtfully and tells you that farmers, more than anyone, are the keepers of slow stories. They plant them, they wait for them, they harvest them gently, season by season. You pass neat rows of millet swaying in the breeze, their tall, feathery heads nodding as if they already know the tales the griot will tell. He explains that in many West African empires, the farmers' calendars weren't kept on paper but in songs. The planting season, the rains, the harvest, all folded into melodies and rhythms that slipped easily into daily work. A mother would hum the planting song while scattering seeds. A child would whistle the harvest tune while brushing millet grains into baskets. The story of the seasons was always playing quietly in the background, like the soft ticking of a familiar clock. Historians still argue whether these agricultural songs were intentionally created as memory tools, like musical calendars, or whether they simply evolved that way, gentle byproducts of a life spent moving to the same seasonal rhythms. Some scholars suggest the griots taught these songs directly. Others believe they drifted naturally from field to field, humming themselves into memory. You pass a farmer sharpening a short-handled hoe, the metallic scrape steady and slow. He nods to the griot and offers you both a handful of roasted peanuts, their salty shells still warm from the sun. The griot cracks one open and tells you about the peanut's quiet journey, how it traveled across continents, tucked into traders' sacks, passed from hand to hand, and how, like a well-told story, it found new homes in distant soils. You pause near a thatched granary, its mud walls cool to the touch, its roof carefully layered to keep out the rain. The griot shows you one of his smaller tokens, a pebble with a single dark stripe. He says it reminds him of the story of a granary mouse who, according to village legend, could count better than the local merchant. The mouse, it seems, was particularly fond of peanuts. You can't help but grin at the idea of a mathematically gifted mouse outwitting a man with a ledger. The griot explains that some of the most cherished village stories aren't about grand kings or distant battles. They're about clever animals, mischievous children, stubborn goats, and yes, the occasional peanut-hoarding mouse. These stories folded themselves easily into the farmer's long days, their rhythms as soft and steady as the rustle of grain in the wind. You trail your fingers along the rough wooden fences that pen in small herds of goats, their sleepy eyes half closed as they chew lazily. The griot tells you goats, too, are stubborn storytellers. Lose one goat, and the whole village will remember. He taps his gourd and shares the story of a goat that wandered so far from home that it crossed into another kingdom, and sparked a 3-day argument between two villages over whose goat it really was. According to the griot, the goat seemed entirely uninterested in the outcome. Historians still debate whether these kinds of inter-village disputes over livestock had any significant impact on trade routes and alliances, or whether they were mostly the stuff of local squabbles and long-winded gossip. Some scholars suggest small disputes could ripple into larger regional tensions. Others argue that, like the goat, most people simply wandered on. You pass through a small market now, where traders unroll woven mats, spreading out baskets of kola nuts, hand-carved tools, and neat bundles of dried fish. The air smells sharp and savory, touched by the faint sweetness of fermenting fruit. The griot tells you that marketplaces are like living archives. Every trader carries a slice of memory, tucked between bolts of cloth or bundled with stalks of grain. Stories trade hands here as easily as coins. You pause at a stall where a woman grinds millet into fine flour, her wooden pestle thudding in a slow, steady rhythm. She greets you both with a smile and offers a soft cake, its surface dusted with ground peanuts. The griot accepts it with a grateful nod and tells you that recipes too are stories. A cake like this might carry the memory of 5 grandmothers, each adding her own twist, her own secret measure of sweetness. Historians still argue whether the transmission of food traditions among West African communities was tightly controlled by family lines, or whether recipes traveled more freely across villages, shaped by trade and curiosity rather than strict inheritance. Some believe food was carefully guarded knowledge. Others suggest it was happily shared, as portable as a song. You sit for a while in the shade of a baobab tree, its thick trunk cool against your back, its branches sprawling like the outstretched arms of a sleepy storyteller. The griot tells you that baobabs are natural gathering places, meeting spots for the village, shade for traders, resting places for travelers who need a moment to dust the road from their sandals. And of course, they are very good listeners. You watch as a group of children circle the tree, their game involving pebbles and rhythmic claps. The griot explains that even children's games carry stories, rules passed down from older siblings, gestures borrowed from travelers, songs stitched together over generations. You realize that the tokens in the griot's gourd don't just hold stories of kings and empires. They also hold the soft weight of daily life, the peanut shared under a hot sun, the missing goat, the stubborn rhythm of the millet song. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your tunic, the scent of ground nuts still clinging to your fingers. The path stretches on, curving gently toward the next village, the next story. And as you walk, the griot taps his gourd again, its quiet clink a promise that memory isn't always heavy. Sometimes it drifts as lightly as a peanut shell on the breeze. You leave the cool shade of the baobab tree behind, the soft scent of ground nuts and dust still clinging to your tunic as you and the griot continue down the winding path. The gourd taps lightly against his hip, a small, steady pulse that now feels like part of your own rhythm. The trail leads you toward a larger village, where the sound of iron hammers tapping rhythmically on anvils drifts through the air like soft percussion. The griot explains that this is the home of the blacksmiths, people whose craft carries stories not only of tools and weapons, but of ancestors, of iron-rich hills, of fire carefully tamed. The scent here is sharp, iron, charcoal, the faint sweetness of cooling millet cakes stacked nearby. You approach a forge where a blacksmith carefully shapes the glowing edge of a farming hoe, his hammer rising and falling in smooth, practiced arcs. He nods in greeting, his face streaked with soot but his smile warm. The griot tells you that blacksmiths were often seen as more than craftsmen. In some regions, they were considered the keepers of secrets, the ones who knew how to coax iron from stone, who could bend earth to their will without cracking it. Historians still argue whether the elevated status of blacksmiths was more about practical necessity. After all, who doesn't need a good hoe or spear? Or whether the mystery of working with fire and stone gave them a kind of quiet, sacred power. Some scholars suggest blacksmith lineages held tightly to their specialized knowledge. Others believe the secrets of the forge spread more freely between communities than once thought. The griot taps his gourd and tells you that, in the stories he carries, blacksmiths were not just workers of iron but shapers of history. One pebble in his collection marks the story of a famous blacksmith who forged not only blades but alliances, gifting his finest work to neighboring villages as a gesture of peace. You step closer to the forge, feeling the gentle heat against your skin, the faint sting of charcoal smoke at the back of your throat. The griot tells you that iron wasn't only about warfare or farming, it shaped the rhythm of life itself. Iron hoes allowed for wider fields. Iron knives made finer meals. Iron needles stitched better shoes. Even the simple iron pot revolutionized cooking, letting stews simmer longer, their flavors deepening as the day wore on. You pass a row of pots cooling in the sun, their rounded bellies still faintly warm. A woman ladles thick peanut stew into a smaller vessel, the scent savory and comforting. She offers you a taste, and the griot laughs, saying that travelers must always accept stew. It's a village rule, unwritten but ironclad. You sip the warm broth, its richness coating your tongue, the soft bite of ground spices lingering pleasantly. The griot tells you that recipes like this one traveled just as widely as iron goods. Traders and blacksmiths would swap not just blades but cooking secrets, shaping a culinary map that rippled far beyond any one village. Historians still debate whether the culinary influence of blacksmith traders was significant in the formation of regional flavors, or whether it was the steady work of farmers and home cooks that kept food traditions stable over generations. Some argue that trade routes carried flavors as efficiently as they did salt or iron. Others suggest that cooking remained mostly local, passed down from pot to pot. You wander with the griot toward the village's communal space, where iron bells hang from wooden posts, their surfaces smooth from years of use. These bells are not for war, they're for messages, for gathering, for soft rhythms that stitch a village's heartbeat together. The griot taps one gently with his staff, the clear, resonant tone spreading across the dusty courtyard. He tells you that in some empires, iron bells spoke the language of distance, a long ring for the traders returning from the coast, a short pulse for the farmer's market, a sharp chime to announce a visiting storyteller. You sit near the base of the bell post as children gather around the griot, their eyes wide, their fingers already playing with small stones as if preparing to weave their own stories. The griot tells them the story of a blacksmith who built a bell so perfectly tuned that when it rang, the goats came running, the millet danced in its baskets, and even the wind seemed to pause to listen. You glance at the children, their mouths half open, their shoulders leaning in, their sandals dusted with soft powder from the courtyard. Historians still argue whether such story bells were actual objects with near mythical properties, or whether they were gentle exaggerations, crafted by griots to hold the attention of children with sticky fingers and wandering minds. Some scholars believe remarkable bells did exist, tuned with careful precision. Others think these bells rang loudest in stories, not in courtyards. The griot taps his gourd, the tokens inside shifting like tiny echoes of the bell's song. You follow him toward a small workshop where iron bracelets, anklets, and hairpins are being carefully shaped. A young apprentice hammers softly, his hands steady, his focus wrapped tightly around the thin curl of iron blooming beneath his tool. The griot tells you that jewelry, too, tells stories. An iron anklet might mark a family line, a coming of age, a trade journey completed. The griot shows you one of his Gourds tokens, a tiny rusted ring, simple and slightly bent. He says it belonged to a trader who crossed deserts and rivers to bring stories and salt to distant lands. You wonder how many ankles, how many hands, how many baskets of millet that little ring must have passed before finding its way to the griot's gourd. You walk slowly through the village's edge, where piles of discarded iron shavings shimmer faintly in the sunlight, their edges dulled by years of rain and footsteps. The griot tells you that even the scraps have stories. They mark the blades that were too thin, the hoes that cracked, the bells that never quite sang the right note. You pause to pick up a small shard, its surface rough but oddly warm, as if it still remembers the fire that shaped it. And as you walk on, you feel the gourd's quiet clink, keeping time with your steps, a soft, steady reminder that stories, like iron, are sometimes strongest when they've been hammered gently, folded carefully, and left to cool in the rhythm of daily life. You follow the griot as the village's iron bells grow quieter behind you, their soft hum fading into the steady crunch of your sandals on the dust-packed road. The scent of charcoal lingers faintly in your clothes, clinging to you like the whisper of stories not quite finished. The path now winds toward the river, its wide, slow current glinting softly in the midday sun. The air grows heavier here, thick with moisture and the sweet scent of flowering reeds. You hear the buzz of insects, the soft splash of fish teasing the surface, and the distant creak of boats moving with the lazy rhythm of the water. The griot tells you that the river is its own kind of storyteller. He taps his gourd, the sound light and hollow in the humid air, and says that along these waterways, news traveled faster than a sprinting messenger, carried by traders in dugout canoes, by fishermen swapping stories at midday, by boatmen who sang the same songs for generations as they poled through the shallows. Historians still argue whether the rivers of West Africa were more influential as trade highways or as cultural threads, stitching distant communities into shared languages, customs, and stories. Some scholars suggest that goods like salt and gold shaped the empires most profoundly. Others believe it was the steady drip of stories, songlines, proverbs, quiet deals between passing boats, that truly tied these river systems into something larger than trade. You approach a small riverside settlement where traders are unloading wide-mouthed jars, bundles of cloth, and tightly sealed gourds that rock gently with the river's tug. The griot smiles and tells you that river gourds sometimes carried more than oil or water. They carried memory, stories, songs pressed into their sides with soft carvings, small symbols etched just deep enough to hold the shape of a tale. One trader shows you a gourd faintly marked with crisscrossing lines, each one a river, each notch a settlement, each curve a story of who traded where and what they brought back. The griot taps his gourd in return, a gentle hello in the language of hollow vessels. You sip cool river water from a carved wooden cup, the taste soft, slightly sweet, and the boatman who offers it tells you that river water carries stories of its own. Some claim it remembers the stones it passes, the fish that slip through its currents, the songs that drift across its surface. Historians still debate whether these oral geographies, maps remembered through rivers and stories rather than ink and parchment, were as precise as modern charts, or whether they functioned more like narrative scaffolding, guiding memory rather than fixing exact coordinates. Some scholars insist that traders navigated vast distances using these story maps with remarkable accuracy. Others suggest the tales were flexible, designed to make the journey feel as though you were always a little closer to home. You sit near a canoe where an elder weaves a fish trap from reeds, his hands steady, his pace unhurried. The griot tells you that even fishing methods carried their own stories, techniques passed down with quiet pride, with small variations that marked one family's lineage from another. The elder tells you that his traps are built with the rhythm of the river in mind, its eddies, its seasonal moods, the way it sulks in the dry months and chatters in the rains. He weaves as he speaks, and you notice his hands pause just slightly on certain knots, as though each binding holds a secret step in a recipe for patience. The griot picks up a small pebble and rolls it between his fingers. He tells you that some griots carry river stones to remind them of watery tales, of boats that never returned, of markets that vanished with the shifting banks, of lovers who sent songs downstream, hoping the current would deliver their words. You watch the children at the river's edge, splashing each other, their shouts rising into the thick air. They float small reed boats, watching them drift lazily with the current. One child insists her boat will carry her story all the way to the sea. The griot laughs softly, telling you that maybe it will, and maybe when it reaches the coast, someone will find it, trace the faint scratchings on its hull, and weave that story into a new song. You follow him along the riverbank where traders prepare to depart. They stack their gourds, fold their fabrics, and call lazy goodbyes to one another. Their canoes slip into the water with a quiet splash, their poles pressing into the mud with a soft thunk that seems to mark the beginning of another story in motion. The griot taps his gourd and tells you that in his memory's weaving, the river is not just a highway, it's a mirror. It reflects back the stories told along its banks, carrying them forward, sometimes bending them, sometimes softening their edges like pebbles worn smooth in the current. Historians still argue whether these river-based networks truly carried cultural influence as efficiently as goods like gold and salt, or whether the stories simply drifted, taking root where they pleased and fading where they did not. Some scholars suggest river routes were as central to shaping the region's identity as the great trade caravans. Others believe the cultural ripples of the rivers were slower, quieter, but no less enduring. You walk with the griot as the river bends, its path unfurling lazily between reed-choked islands and soft banks scattered with purple flowers. The air hums with insects, the distant croak of frogs, the rhythmic drip of water from trailing oars. You pause to rest on a smooth, sun-warmed rock, watching the river pull slowly, steadily, its surface dappled with sunlight, its current whispering stories you can almost, but not quite, understand. The griot tells you that his gourd remembers the river's stories, its twists and turns, its long patience, its quiet way of folding the past into the present and carrying it downstream without fanfare. You feel the weight of the gourd's soft clinking at his side, the hollow echo of 100 pebbles shifting gently as he moves. You rise and follow him again, your steps light, your ears tuned to the soft language of water, your mind wrapped gently in the winding tales that the river still carries. You follow the griot along the soft curve of the river, your footsteps brushing against low grasses and clusters of wildflowers that lean lazily toward the water. The air is thick here, softened by the river's steady exhale, and your skin glows faintly with the gentle sweat of a warm afternoon. The griot's gourd taps softly against his side, its rhythm faint but constant like a heartbeat that never rushes. He leads you to a gathering under a broad tree, its branches sprawling like slow-moving rivers themselves. Beneath its shade, a small group is waiting. Older griots, their voices worn soft by years of reciting and remembering. They welcome you with quiet nods, and you settle among them as the griot taps his gourd once more. A greeting, a signal that the stories can continue here too. One griot begins to speak. his voice slow, each word resting comfortably in the thick air. He tells of the great epics, the stories that stretch beyond the memory of a single lifetime, the tales so vast that no one griot can carry them alone. Historians still argue whether these enormous oral histories, some lasting days in their full telling, were performed from start to finish in a single sitting or shared in smaller, carefully chosen fragments depending on the occasion. Some scholars believe the complete recitations were rare, reserved for only the grandest festivals. Others suggest the epic's pace bent gently to the rhythm of the audience, paused, resumed, stretched over years like a gourd that is refilled again and again. You listen as the griots exchange parts of a story, each one picking up where the last leaves off, their voices weaving like slow thread through the branches overhead. They speak of the great warrior kings who rode out before the sun rose, of queens who governed entire provinces with the patience of potters spinning clay, of battles that rumbled like distant thunder but whose details are now soft and smooth, polished by years of careful retelling. One griot gently drums his fingers along his gourd, and the sound seems to summon a memory from the air itself. A tale of a king who trained his messengers to carry not letters but songs, carefully composed so that each verse matched a part of the journey. The road itself became the staff on which the notes rested. Historians still puzzle over whether such sung routes, sometimes called oral wayfinding, were deliberate navigational tools or more poetic flourishes layered onto everyday paths. Some suggest the messengers truly mapped their travels in song, using melody to recall distances and turns. Others believe the practice may have been symbolic, a way to dignify the long, dusty stretches of travel with something that hummed just beneath the step. You sip cool water from a shallow wooden cup, the liquid tasting faintly of the clay vessel that held it, and the griot's stories continue to swirl around you like soft breezes. They tell you that some griots inherit their roles through family lines, their fathers pressing gourd handles into their palms when they are still too small to carry them properly. Others, they say, are chosen, recognized by older griots who hear the echo of the stories already nestled inside them, waiting to unfold. The griot beside you leans close and says that sometimes the gourds choose too. He taps his own gourd with a sly smile, explaining that a gourd with the right sound, the right echo, the right soft ring will simply find its way to the griot meant to carry it. You laugh gently, unsure if this is a joke, but the griot only shrugs, as if to say that not all stories require your full belief to settle comfortably in your chest. The gathering drifts toward stories of forgotten rulers, of cities swallowed by the forests, of names that now live only in the gentle curves of a song's refrain. One griot recounts a curious tale of a king who was so particular about the gourds used in his court that he declared any gourd that soured water to be cursed and banned from his lands. Historians still debate whether such bans truly existed or whether they were quiet exaggerations, stories to lend royal quirks a touch of lasting humor. Some suggest the king's aversion was rooted in genuine health concerns. Others argue that the story is simply the soft ripple of a single royal complaint, lovingly stretched into a tradition by storytellers who found it too amusing to abandon. You watch as one griot carefully traces the rim of his gourd with a smooth stone, explaining that the surface must be tended, the cracks gently softened, the tone checked and rechecked as the gourd ages. He tells you that gourds can grow tired if they're neglected, that their stories might fall out of tune if the keeper doesn't listen carefully. You trail your fingers along your own borrowed gourd, its surface cool and faintly textured, its hollow weight a soft reminder that stories are not just words, they are shapes, sounds, objects that rattle quietly at your side as you walk. The griot across from you begins to sing, a melody so slow it seems to pull the heat from the air, his voice a low hum that wraps around the rhythm of his tapping gourd. The others join him, layering soft phrases over the melody like weaving threads into cloth. The words drift in and out of your understanding, but the weight of them settles in your bones. Their meaning carried not just in the language, but in the steady, patient rhythm that hums just beneath it all. You close your eyes briefly, breathing in the warmth of the river air, the faint, fragrant wood smoke from a nearby cooking fire, the quiet murmur of the griots' voices folding gently into one another. The stories are not in a hurry here. You lean into the moment, letting the gourd's hollow rhythm settle into your pulse, the weight of memory pressing softly against your palm. You follow the griot as the singing fades, his gourd tapping faintly at his side, his stories trailing behind him like slow-moving streams, ready to meander into the next waiting listener. You walk slowly beside the griot, your sandals brushing through the soft dust of a well-worn path, the river's steady hum now a faint murmur behind you. The sun hangs lower, draping the world in a soft, honeyed glow that clings to your skin like the last whisper of afternoon warmth. The griot's gourd swings gently at his hip, its rhythmic tap becoming as familiar to you now as your own heartbeat. You follow his steps toward a small village where the houses lean comfortably against one another, their thatched roofs soft silhouettes against the sky. Here, you discover another layer of the griot's life, not only a keeper of grand histories, but a quiet architect of daily memory. The griot's stories do not only belong to kings and battles and sprawling empires. They live in the tiny pockets of village life, where the names of grandmothers and fishermen and midwives are folded carefully into songs, protected like small, bright beads strung along the gourd's familiar curve. You pause by a low cooking fire where a woman stirs a pot fragrant with the sharp tang of tomatoes and the nutty edge of ground millet. She laughs as she tells you the griot has already woven her family's favorite story into a song, a story about a rooster who forgot to crow and nearly delayed the entire village's day. The griot taps his gourd and hums the tune, a playful rhythm that tickles the edge of your memory, as though you've heard it before in the soft places between dreams. Historians still argue whether griots served equally as village record keepers or whether their primary role remained tethered to royal courts and formal ceremonies. Some scholars suggest that the village griots were deeply entwined with local life, shaping the oral history of entire families. Others believe this role was more informal, a gentle byproduct of the griot's natural curiosity, their tendency to collect stories wherever they wandered. You watch as the griot carefully repeats a young boy's full name, adding a soft lyrical twist at the end, a subtle blessing, a folded wish. Names, he tells you, are not just labels. They are containers, and when you say them in the right rhythm, they carry weight, like a gourd that never fully empties. You wander through the village's quiet paths, the edges of doorways brushed with drying herbs, the scent of fresh thatch still clinging to some rooftops. A group of children chase each other past you, their laughter sharp and bright, their wooden toys clattering as they tumble. The griot points out that the stories you tell children are the ones that last longest, their sticky hands clinging to every word, their little feet retracing the steps of old heroes in the dusty courtyards. You follow him to a quiet gathering near a central fire, where the griot is invited to settle a small dispute, a question about a family's lineage, a branching path in a family tree that's grown a little tangled over time. The griot drums his fingers along his gourd, the soft, hollow tap guiding his memory through generations. He recites the names slowly, each one sliding into place like a bead on a string, the gaps gently filled with stories of when so-and-so's daughter married the potter's cousin, or when a fisherman's son traded salt for grain 3 markets ago. You realize that in this moment, the griot is not a judge, not in the way you might imagine, but a careful gardener tending the shape of memory, pruning it, watering it, encouraging it to grow in the right direction. Historians still puzzle over whether griots deliberately adjusted the details of genealogies to preserve harmony within communities, or whether their role demanded strict factual accuracy. Some suggest the griot's memory could be gently flexible, bending to smooth out disputes. Others argue that their reputations hinged entirely on precise, unbroken chains of names. The griot's decision is accepted with the soft nods and grateful murmurs of the gathered family. A pot of steaming millet porridge is passed around, and you taste its faint saltiness, the grains softened just enough to melt on your tongue. As the sky deepens to a soft violet, you walk with the griot to a quieter edge of the village, where the soft clink of wooden pestles rises from a group of women preparing shea butter. Their rhythmic pounding folds into the evening's hum, the sounds settling like a gentle heartbeat against the approaching night. The griot tells you that the stories carried in the gourd often stretch beyond the people themselves. They hold the memory of tools, of foods, of small inventions whose names would otherwise crumble away with time. He sings briefly of a forgotten dye, a color once used to mark cloth during the first rains, its recipe now slipping quietly into the soft places of memory. He taps his gourd, as if to seal the story safely inside. You wonder how many small things the gourd remembers that no one else does. The griot smiles as though he knows your question before you can ask it. He tells you that gourds are sometimes passed to apprentices when the older griots feel their memories loosening like softened rope. But not always. Sometimes a gourd is buried with its keeper, the stories folded into the earth, a quiet reminder that not all tales are meant to survive. Historians still debate whether the burial of gourd instruments alongside griots was a widespread practice or a localized tradition unique to certain regions. Some argue that the gourd's burial marked the closing of a particular story's circle. Others suggest the gourds were often passed down, softened by many hands, their surfaces smoothed by decades of tapping. You trace your fingers along your own gourd's rim, feeling the faint unevenness of its edge, the soft dents where memory has knocked gently again and again. The night hums around you now, the village's fires flickering lower, the quiet rhythm settling like soft blankets across the pathways. You walk with the griot back toward his home, the gourd tapping gently at his side, each step folding another layer of the story into the soft dust beneath your feet. You rise early with the griot, the morning air still cool and soft, brushing gently against your skin as the first golden light stretches lazily across the village rooftops. The day wakes slowly here, the scent of damp earth and simmering porridge weaving through the breeze. The griot taps his gourd lightly as he walks, the rhythm casual, unhurried, as if the stories themselves are just beginning to blink awake. You follow him past quiet courtyards and the faint rustle of thatched roofs settling into the day's warmth. He tells you that while much of his work is tied to memory, to names, to the soft unfolding of stories, there's another task just as important: training the next griot. You pause as he greets a young apprentice, a boy no older than 12 who carefully cradles a smaller gourd, its surface still fresh, its skin pale and unblemished, its weight not yet heavy with memory. The training, you learn, begins not with names but with sounds. The boy listens as the griot taps out a rhythm on his own gourd, the sequence soft and simple at first, then more intricate, folding over itself like woven cloth. The boy repeats it, his fingers fumbling but eager, the hollow sound echoing softly between them. The griot smiles, patient as the sun rising behind him. Historians still argue whether griot apprenticeships were formal, tightly structured paths, or whether they evolved naturally within families and communities, passed down through observation and countless hours of shared rhythm. Some suggest the training was carefully regulated with clear milestones. Others believe it was more fluid, shaped by the apprentice's ear, the elder's trust, and the slow layering of daily life. You sit nearby as the griot shares another small lesson, not a grand epic today, but a simple proverb tied to the rhythm. When the drum is full, it doesn't argue with the stick. You think about that, rolling the words over like smooth pebbles in your mind. The boy hums the proverb as he taps his gourd, committing both sound and story to memory, his small hands already starting to carry the shape of the future. You walk together toward a wide open space where older apprentices gather, some now nearly grown, their voices low, their movements deliberate. They practice recalling genealogies, tracing the winding threads of family trees as if braiding strands of grass. The griot listens carefully, his eyes soft but sharp, occasionally correcting a missed name, a forgotten marriage, a skipped ancestor. Each correction lands gently, not as a punishment, but as a quiet reminder that every name matters, that even the smallest misstep can ripple through generations. You watch as one apprentice pauses, tapping his gourd in hesitation, his brow furrowed as he struggles to recall a merchant's son's name from 2 villages over. The griot supplies the name with a single tap, a rhythm that seems to jog the boy's memory instantly. The boy sighs in relief, and the griot simply smiles as though memory itself is best grown slowly, like the steady climb of a vine. Historians still debate whether griot apprentices were expected to memorize the entire lineage of their region, or whether they specialized, some focusing on royal houses, others on village tales, still others on the subtle rhythms of market histories and trade agreements. Some suggest that the division of memory was practical, a way to ease the weight of so many stories. Others argue that true griots were expected to carry it all. As the morning stretches on, you walk to a nearby grove where the griot teaches his apprentice a second lesson: how to listen to silence. You can't hold every story at once, he says, tapping his gourd in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Some stories need to rest. Some stories need quiet before they come back to you. You sit in the soft hush of the grove, the sun mottling the ground in lazy golden patches, the breeze stirring the leaves just enough to create the faintest rustle, a rhythm without a drum. The apprentice sits quietly too, his gourd resting against his knees, his fingers tracing the faint grain of its skin. You think about the weight of memory, how it isn't just what you carry, but how you carry it. The griot's stories seem lighter now, not because they matter less, but because he holds them with the steady ease of someone who knows when to let them breathe. The griot taps his gourd once more, the sound echoing gently, folding into the soft rhythm of the grove. You ask if the gourd will ever be full. The griot chuckles, shaking his head. The gourd is never full, but sometimes it forgets what's inside just for a little while. And that's all right. Historians still discuss whether griots relied entirely on memory, or whether they subtly encoded stories into patterns, rhythms, and physical cues like knots in a cord or markings on a gourd surface. Some suggest these mnemonic aids were widespread, quiet helpers tucked into the griot's toolkit. Others believe the oral tradition thrived precisely because it was entirely free from written crutches. You walk slowly back toward the village as the apprentices continue their gentle practice, their gourds tapping in soft conversation, their voices rising and falling like the first lines of stories not yet fully told. You realize that the future of memory here is not a heavy burden passed down in silence. It's a rhythm, a shared beat, a slow unfolding that carries the comfort of a well-worn path. The griot walks with you, the gourd swinging lightly at his side, his steps as steady as the stories he carries. The day stretches long and warm around you, the scent of millet and sun-warmed earth folding into the gentle hum of life moving at its own patient pace. The sun hovers lazily over the horizon as you walk with the griot toward the edge of the village, where the grasses grow tall and the paths stretch further, leading toward the next settlement tucked just beyond the low hills. The air here feels broader, the breeze picking up the soft scent of drying gourds and distant fires. Today the griot prepares to travel, his gourd carefully strapped to his side, his voice humming quietly as though the stories are already gathering just beneath his breath. You follow him, your steps falling into rhythm with the gentle sway of his pace. He tells you that while griots belong to their communities, they also drift, sometimes slowly, sometimes with purpose, carrying stories between villages, between royal courts, between places where memory needs stitching. You walk along the dusty path, passing herders guiding their cattle with soft whistles, women balancing clay jars on their heads, and traders squatting beneath woven canopies, their goods piled in careful stacks. The griot explains that traveling griots are like threads pulling the cloth of the region together. They don't just tell stories, they refresh them, gather new branches of family trees, confirm marriages, recite agreements, and sometimes gently correct what has been forgotten or reshaped by time. Historians still debate whether griots in medieval West Africa traveled alone, accompanied by musicians, or as part of larger caravans. Some argue that royal griots journeyed with full entourages, complete with drummers and singers to amplify their performances. Others suggest that most griots traveled lightly, moving quietly between towns, welcomed more for their memory than for their spectacle. You pass a resting caravan, their camels kneeling in soft huffs, their woven baskets stuffed with goods from far beyond the Sahel, salt slabs, indigo-dyed cloth, carved trinkets, and bundles of kola nuts. The traders nod to the griot, offering warm greetings, their faces creased with the soft familiarity of old stories well told. You learn that griots were often welcomed in these merchant camps, not just as entertainers, but as valuable record keepers. They remembered which families traded with whom, which routes were safest, which agreements were sealed with promises still waiting to be honored. You sip cool water from a leather pouch as the griot recounts how merchants sometimes gifted him with simple tokens, a carved bead, a twist of sweetened bread, a small, hand-stitched pouch, not as payment, but as gratitude for carrying their names across the dust. The road hums with quiet life as you move onward, the gourd at the griot's side tapping softly in time with his step. You ask if he ever forgets the stories. The griot smiles, his eyes crinkling with gentle humor. Sometimes the stories forget me, but they always find their way back. Historians still argue whether the oral histories of griots were perfectly preserved, or whether the stories shifted subtly with each telling, evolving like the soft drift of sand across stone. Some suggest the griots were fiercely precise, their memories sharp as blades. Others believe the stories flowed like rivers, always recognizable, but never exactly the same. As you walk, the griot pauses to speak with a farmer tending his narrow plot. The farmer's family line is traced with a few simple questions: a grandmother's name, a marriage in the neighboring village, a cousin who once bartered for a white cow. The griot taps his gourd as he nods, weaving the new threads into his memory, the soft rhythm of his fingers marking the story's place. You continue toward a crossroads where other griots gather, their gourds slung across their backs, their voices mingling in quiet exchange. They trade details, refresh family trees, share fragments of new marriages, new births, small disputes, and quiet resolutions. It's like watching a network reconnect itself in real time, a living archive humming gently beneath the soft buzz of insects and the faint rustle of dry grasses. One griot gestures to a worn bench beneath a baobab tree, and you all settle there, the shade cool and deep, the bark rough beneath your fingertips. They swap proverbs like lazy riddles. When a gourd is cracked, the story leaks. The river does not forget its source, but it may take its time returning. Each proverb feels like a secret folded into the slow rhythm of the afternoon. The griots explain that sharing stories among themselves is a kind of weaving, a way to patch holes in memory, to smooth over forgotten corners, to confirm what belongs and what has drifted too far. You sip thick, sweetened tea as they discuss a marriage from a neighboring village. One griot recalls the bride's lineage in perfect detail. Another gently corrects the groom's father's name. A third taps his gourd and says softly, "No, it was the younger brother who gave the dowry goat." They all nod, the correction settling quietly into the group's collective rhythm. Historians still debate whether these cross-checking gatherings among griots were formal, expected rituals, or whether they unfolded casually, shaped by shared paths and meandering conversations. Some suggest griots traveled with the express purpose of verifying histories. Others argue that it was a natural byproduct of wandering, a quiet recalibration of memory. You watch as the griots scatter again, their gourds swinging, their sandals brushing against the dusty road. You and your griot companion head toward the next village, where a festival is rumored to be unfolding, a celebration of the planting season, where music, food, and stories will ripple through the night. You realize, as you walk, that the griot's memory isn't a fortress. It's a garden, constantly tended, occasionally pruned, and always growing, with new seeds scattered carefully along the way. The sun begins to lean toward the horizon, stretching your shadows long and thin across the road as you step steadily toward the waiting village. The soft hum of stories trailing gently behind you. The village comes into view, its roofs low and rounded, its fences woven from slender branches, its people already moving in that slow, thoughtful rhythm that says, "Tonight we celebrate." You walk alongside the griot as the scent of roasting peanuts drifts through the air, mingling with the soft smoke from cooking fires and the bright tang of fermenting millet beer. There's music here, the steady pulse of drums warming the air, the twang of the kora stringing through the evening like a soft golden thread. Children dart past you, their sandals kicking up lazy puffs of dust, their laughter bubbling bright against the fading sun. The griot's gourd taps gently at his hip as he walks, his voice low, rehearsing the opening lines of a story that has crossed kingdoms, weathered seasons, and stretched across the wide back of time. Tonight's gathering isn't just a festival. It's a weaving of memory, a place where history breathes out loud, where the people lean into the steady rhythm of the tale to remind themselves who they are, where they come from, and which threads still hold. The griot pauses near a tall man arranging wooden benches beneath a tree whose wide branches stretch like patient arms. They greet each other warmly, their words slow and unhurried, as if the day itself still has hours to spare. The griot's role tonight is known. He is the memory keeper, the map walker, the one who will sit before the circle and open the gourd, not to pour water, but to pour stories. Historians still argue whether griots in these communal spaces followed rigid narrative structures or allowed the stories to bend and sway with the mood of the crowd. Some scholars believe certain epics had to be told in precise order, down to the measured cadence of each verse. Others suggest griots often meandered, choosing which details to expand, which side paths to follow, which repetitions to linger over depending on the audience's gentle cues. You settle near the edge of the gathering, the wooden bench cool beneath you, the air now thick with the scent of grilled meats and sweet spiced fritters. The drums soften to a heartbeat tempo as the griot steps forward, his fingers brushing the gourd at his side. He taps it gently, once, twice, 3 times, and the circle hushes, the quiet falling like soft cloth over the crowd. The story begins not with a hero or a battle or a kingdom, but with a tree, one that stands in the middle of the village, its branches carrying the names of those who came before, its roots tangled around the resting places of those whose stories now live only in the mouths of griots. You listen as the griot's voice unspools the story, his rhythm slow, his breath steady, his gourd tapping softly in that familiar pattern. He weaves the tale of a man who crossed rivers to bring news of a marriage, of a woman who sang a child's name into the morning sky, of a harvest remembered not for its abundance, but for the kindness it inspired when a neighbor's grain ran low. Each story carries a small weight, a soft reminder that history is not only the grand sweep of empires, but the quiet murmur of lives folded carefully into the everyday. The griot's fingers dance over the gourd, pausing, pressing, lifting, each touch tied to a person, a place, a promise made long ago. You hear a familiar proverb rise from the griot's lips. A story carried gently is never heavy. The crowd nods as though the words are an old friend, their shoulders settling, their hands resting quietly in their laps. Historians still debate whether griots memorized entire genealogies by heart, or whether their gourds served as subtle cue systems, each notch and groove mapping the path of the tale. Some suggest the gourd was an anchor, a tactile roadmap in a sea of names. Others argue the gourd was more ceremonial, a companion to the griot's voice, its true purpose resting in tradition more than necessity. The griot's story stretches softly into the night, the fire crackling, the drums murmuring, the crowd leaning closer, their faces tipped toward the steady warmth of the flame. You notice the way the story lingers over small details, the shape of a man's sandals, the weight of a woman's basket, the taste of the first mango of the season, as if the griot knows these are the threads that hold the tapestry steady. A child leans against her mother's knee, her eyes growing heavy, the rhythm of the griot's voice wrapping around her like a soft, familiar lullaby. The story meanders, loops, returns, each step slow and deliberate, each name carefully placed like a bead on a string. You realize that this is not a race to the end, but a quiet unfolding, a shared breath, a slow remembering. The griot taps his gourd one last time, a soft echo that fades into the night. The crowd hums their approval, not with wild cheers, but with quiet, satisfied murmurs, their heads nodding gently as though they've just stepped back into the comfortable rhythm of their own roots. The griot settles onto a low stool, his gourd resting at his side, his voice slipping into quiet conversation with those nearest to him. You sit for a long while, the fire's warmth brushing your knees, the scent of roasted peanuts lingering on the breeze. You think about the road you've walked, the gourds you've touched, the stories you've followed like soft footprints across the dust. The griot's gift, you realize, is not in holding the story tightly. It's in letting it breathe, in letting it walk with him, in trusting that even if he forgets a word, a name, a moment, the story will find its way back. And you now have walked alongside it, tracing the grooves of the gourd, the rhythm of the voice, the quiet pulse of memory that carries empires, families, and forgotten kings, not in stone, not in ink, but in breath. The drums fade, the fire softens, the crowd drifts away. You remain seated a little longer, the story settling gently into your skin, like the soft dust of the road, like the familiar hush of night wrapping the village in its steady, patient arms. Wind down. The village quiets now, the night folding itself softly around the low, rounded huts, the fire's final embers winking like sleepy stars beneath the wide sky. You breathe slowly, your shoulders easing, the last threads of the story settling gently around you like a well-worn cloak. The griot's voice lingers faintly, its rhythm still humming in the air, its soft edges brushing against the calm pulse of your breath. The gourd rests beside him, its worn grooves still warm from his touch, its quiet map of memory holding the weight of names, places, moments too small for the grand sweep of history, but too precious to forget. You walk slowly now, your steps light against the dust, your pace unhurried, the night pressing gently against your skin, cool and familiar. The stars seem closer here, their soft glow steady, their light woven into the edges of the stories you've gathered along the way. There is no rush to leave this place, no need to chase the next path. You can linger here, where the stories breathe quietly, where memory settles softly like the hush of olive leaves in a slow breeze, where the gourd's faint tap fades into a gentle silence that holds you steady. The rhythm eases, the breath slows, the story rests. And you, well, you can rest here too. End of script. Sweet dreams.